I was invited to my brother's engagement party, but when I arrived, my aunt whispered, "He only invited you out of pity. No name card, no seat, no acknowledgement." I turned around and left. The next morning, my brother showed up at my door saying, "You didn't have to make a scene. My name's Tyler. I'm 28, single, and, well, I've always kind of been the odd one out in my family. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I just never fit the expectations they had for me. I didn't go to med school like my cousin Olivia. I didn't take up the family business like my older brother, Ethan. Heck, I didn't even stick around. I left, started a quieter life for myself. Freelance writing, traveling when I could, and generally keeping to myself. To be honest, I stopped expecting much from them after years of feeling like an afterthought. But if I'm being real, when that invitation came, it stirred something in me. The thick, cream-colored cardstock with my name written in gold was hard to ignore. Ethan was getting engaged, his girlfriend, Madison, and they were throwing a party to celebrate. For a moment, I almost felt like I was really being included, like maybe I was finally being seen. Ethan and I hadn't really talked in a while. Sure, we'd exchanged the occasional text, birthday wishes, checking in on work, but nothing that felt meaningful. It had been over a year since we'd had a real conversation, so when I opened the envelope, saw the elegant script, and realized it was a real invite, not just a group text or some passive mention, I thought maybe this was his way of reaching out. Maybe things were changing between us. The engagement party was set for a Saturday evening, about 30 minutes outside the city, at some fancy vineyard. I spent more time than I care to admit trying to figure out what to wear. I wanted something nice, but not too flashy. So I went with a dark navy blazer, a white shirt, and slacks. Clean, simple. I even bought a gift, something from their kitchen registry, a fancy Dutch oven. It was pricey, but I wanted it to be meaningful. I wanted to show up and show support. When I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the sun was starting to dip, casting a warm amber glow across the vines. It felt like something out of a movie. For a split second, I imagined walking in, seeing Ethan's face light up, him pulling me into a hug, and maybe even hearing Madison smile and say, "We're so glad you're here." And maybe, just maybe, I'd sit down at a table and finally feel like I was part of the family again. But instead, I barely made it through the door when my aunt, holding her glass of Chardonnay, leaned in close and whispered, "He only invited you out of pity, you know." Her breath reeked faintly of wine. Madison said they had to, otherwise it had looked too obvious. I froze, still holding the gift in both hands. I asked what. Certain I'd misheard her. She tilted her head, looking at me like I was some stray dog who'd wandered into the wrong yard. "You know how it is," she said with a shrug, like it was common knowledge. "It's nothing personal. We just didn't think you'd actually show up," she added. That hit me harder than I expected. I glanced into the main room. Round tables with crisp white linens, floral centerpieces, and strings of golden lights hanging above. Everyone was already seated, laughing, clinking glasses, toasting. There were placed cards at every seat. I slowly walked past the tables, scanning each one. My name wasn't on any of them. I circled the room once, then twice. No seat, no card, no acknowledgement. Not even from Ethan. I stood there for a moment, awkwardly holding the wrapped gift like a lifeline. I probably looked like a fool, or worse, like someone who crashed a party they weren't invited to. A tight feeling settled in my chest, and I could feel a mix of shame and disappointment rising up, almost suffocating me. I had told myself I wouldn't get my hopes up. I'd told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter more than I wanted to admit. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked out. I didn't even set the gift down. I just carried it back to my car, placed it gently in the passenger seat like it was a person, and sat there in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring out the windshield at the gravel path in front of me. Then I drove home. I didn't post about it, didn't text anyone. I just went quiet. The next morning, at 8:12 a.m., someone rang my doorbell. I hadn't even had a chance to make coffee yet. I opened the door in sweatpants, my hair a mess, and there was Ethan, my brother, standing there, in yesterday's suit minus the tie, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. "You didn't have to make a scene," he said flatly, as if I'd set fire to the place. I blinked, confused. "A scene?" "You stormed out," he said. "People noticed." I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, humorless sound. "Ethan, there's no seat for me." No one even said hello. He shifted uncomfortably. "You could have just stayed, found a chair somewhere, I don't know, mingled." I looked him dead in the eye. "I wasn't supposed to be there, was I? You didn't plan for me." He paused before replying, then said, "Look, Madison handled the seating, all right? I told her to keep it small. I didn't think you'd make a big deal out of it. So I was invited out of pity, I said quietly, almost to myself. That's what Aunt Susan said. I added. Ethan sighed and rubbed his face. She talks too much. She wasn't supposed to say that. I stepped back from the door, suddenly drained. You should go. Tyler. He started, but I cut him off. No, really, if this is the part where I'm supposed to apologize for embarrassing you, it's not going to happen. His expression faltered, like he hadn't expected me to say that, like I'd turned on him instead of the other way around. This is exactly why we don't talk much, he muttered. I shot back, my voice colder than I meant. No, we don't talk because you only remember I exist when it's convenient for you, when it suits you to make yourself feel better by inviting me along. So no one could say you didn't. He didn't respond, just stared at me for a moment before turning and walking down the porch steps, heading back to his car. As Ethan pulled away, my gaze drifted to the kitchen table, where the engagement gift still sat, untouched, still wrapped in its pristine paper. I had no idea what to do with it now. Should I give it away? Return it? Leave it on his doorstep? That moment lingered in my mind, more than just Aunt Susan's whispered words or the absence of my name on the place card. It was the stunned expression on Ethan's face when I refused to just play along, when I didn't accept my role as the forgotten sibling, the one who was expected to be grateful simply for being allowed near the table, even if there wasn't a seat for me. But here's the thing. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. If I wasn't part of their family in their eyes, then I owed them nothing, and I had something they'd all conveniently forgotten about, something they were going to need very soon. Let's just say they were going to remember my name, with or without a place card. For a few days after the party, I went completely quiet. I didn't answer texts, didn't check social media. I just disconnected. It wasn't out of malice. It was out of necessity. I needed the space to think, to feel, to let the sting of everything fade so I could breathe without the bitterness lingering in my chest. But during that silence, I was thinking, reflecting. See, what most of my family didn't know, because they never cared enough to ask, was that for the past 3 years, I've been quietly helping with something that was very important to all of them. My grandfather's trust. Before he passed, Grandpa Thomas made me one of the trustees of his estate. He did it quietly, without any fanfare. He didn't make a big announcement or call a family meeting. Instead, he pulled me aside during my last visit to his old house in Vermont and simply said, "You've got a good head and a quiet heart, Tyler. I want you to help make sure the money doesn't tear the family apart." At the time, I didn't really get what he meant. I thought he was just going on about taxes and legal stuff. But then the paperwork started arriving, the lawyers, the meetings. I had to learn fast. I learned the details of the trust, the clauses, the stipulations, and most importantly, I learned that a significant chunk of the money wasn't just handed out without reason. It was conditional. Things like tuition assistance, mortgage support, even business loans, those required approval from the trustees. Me, along with a firm based in Boston. Ethan's business, his consulting agency, he loved bragging about it. Every family gathering had received a significant loan from that trust 2 years ago. He had no idea I was involved. Grandpa had asked me to keep it quiet, said it would be easier that way. But now, I was starting to think that promise had run its course. A week after the party, I got an email from the firm. A new disbursement request had come in from Ethan, a sizable request. He wanted additional funds to expand his business, leasing a second office space and hiring a part-time assistant. The request was long-winded, filled with business jargon and vague projections. But what stood out the most was the urgency. He needed the money fast in 2 weeks, or a deal he was chasing would fall through. Normally, I would have passed it along without question, approved it, and let the money flow. But this time I clicked reply and asked for a meeting. We met at a small cafe, downtown, neutral ground. I chose it for a reason. It was quiet, public, and not too far from his office. Ethan arrived late, still in his tailored suit, but there was something off about him. He looked tense, checking his watch, tapping his fingers on the table. "Thanks for meeting," he said quickly, sitting down across from me. "I'm assuming this is about the request?" I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "It is." He leaned forward, his posture sharp. "So, can we move forward? I know the firm tends to drag their feet, but this one's time sensitive." I studied him for a moment before speaking. "You didn't know I was a trustee, did you?" His brows furrowed. "What?" "I've been one of the trustees on Grandpa's estate since he passed," I said calmly. "I've seen every request, every report, every loan." He went silent. His face went pale, then flushed with color. "Seriously?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. Seriously. He exhaled, clearly trying to process the information. Okay, that's unexpected, but fine, look. You've seen the numbers, I interrupted, leaning back in my chair. It might be, I said, my voice calm but firm. But here's the thing, Ethan. These funds aren't guaranteed. They're based on values Grandpa set out. Family unity, responsibility, transparency. Come on, Tyler, he snapped, irritation creeping in his voice. Don't make this personal. But you made it personal, I replied, keeping my tone steady. At that party, with the way you treated me, with how your fiancé handled the seating chart, or rather, the lack of one, and with how you couldn't even look me in the eye that night. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but I cut him off. And then you show up at my house, trying to guilt trip me, saying I made a scene? I shook my head. No, Ethan, I didn't make a scene. I quietly walked away, but I could have. Ethan leaned forward again, his tone lowering, trying to maintain control. So what? Is this some kind of revenge? No, I said calmly, meeting his gaze. This is accountability. I could tell he wanted to lash out, to flip the table in frustration, but we were in public, and Ethan's reputation mattered more to him than anything else, so he sat back in his chair, forced a smile, and said, Look, I'll talk to Madison. We'll smooth things over. I'll apologize if that's what you want. That's not what I want, I said, shaking my head. What I want is for you to understand that if this trust is going to support you again, you'll need to show a little more respect to the people behind it. His jaw clenched. So, you're holding the funds hostage until I play nice? You can call it that, I said evenly. I call it protecting Grandpa's legacy. Ethan stood up abruptly, almost knocking his chair over. You're unbelievable. And you, I said softly, should be more careful about who you treat like they don't matter. With that, he stormed out, his footsteps sharp on the pavement. I stayed seated and finished my coffee, the bitter taste in my mouth somehow matching the tension in the air. Later that week, I sent the firm a detailed report listing my concerns about the request, questionable expenses, unclear ROI, a lack of transparency in previous funding reports. I didn't outright veto the request, but I recommended a delay, a full audit, a deeper review, which meant the funds wouldn't be approved anytime soon. I didn't hear from Ethan for 2 more days. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. Tyler, she said, her voice sharp and filled with urgency. What are you doing? I blinked, caught off guard. Hi, Mom. Nice to hear from you, too. Don't play games, she said, cutting straight to the point. Ethan told me you're blocking the trust funds. He needs that money. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the rain tapping against the glass, a steady rhythm that somehow mirrored the tension building inside me. So now you call, I said, my voice quiet. You've always been so sensitive, she continued, as though that was an explanation for everything. You didn't even give him a chance at the party. You just left. You embarrassed us. I embarrassed you? I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief, by not sitting at a table that didn't even exist for me. You should have spoken up, she snapped. Made it work? That's what family does. I laughed, cold and bitter. No, Mom. What family does is make room. What family does is notice when someone's being excluded. What family does is care. You all made it clear where I stand, I said, my words hanging heavy in the air. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she finally spoke. So, this is payback, she said, her voice almost resigned. No, I said, my tone unwavering. This is me finally setting a boundary, and if you don't like it, maybe you should ask yourself why. Before she could respond, I hung up. But I knew that call wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because once the money stopped flowing, people who hadn't spoken to me in years were going to start showing up, and not for the reasons they claimed. It took less than 48 hours. By the end of the week, my phone had gone from sitting quiet, gathering dust, to lighting up like it was New Year's Eve, missed calls, voicemails, texts that started polite enough. Hey, Tyler, can we talk? But then, as the hours passed, they escalated into passive-aggressive guilt trips. First, it was Ethan, then Mom, then Aunt Susan, even Cousin Olivia, who hadn't said more than 5 words to me in 3 years, suddenly wanted to meet for coffee. Yeah, okay. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to the firm in Boston, asking them to begin a compliance review. I needed a paper trail, something formal, something that would hold up. I wasn't trying to ruin Ethan, but if he was going to use Grandpa's money, he was going to do it by the book. And I wasn't going to be sweet-talked or bullied into letting him get away with it. The trust wasn't some family piggy bank. It was meant to support, not to enable. And enabling? That was something my family had become far too good at. Around that time, I started hearing whispers back home. My old childhood friend, Lucas, who still worked at the local credit union, sent me a message. Hey, just FYI, I heard your brother's expansion got delayed. He's blaming funding issues. You good? I told him I was fine, better than fine, actually, because for the first time in years, I wasn't playing the silent background role anymore. I was steering the wheel. A week later, the fallout began. Ethan showed up at my apartment again, but this time I didn't open the door. He knocked once, twice, then a third time. I stood behind the peephole, arms crossed, my heart calm. I know you're in there, he muttered. Come on, Tyler, don't do this. He paused, then added, we're going to tank everything over a party? That made me laugh quietly, because he still didn't get it. This wasn't just about the party, it was about years of subtle exclusion, birthday dinners I wasn't invited to, family vacations I found out about through Instagram, conversations I was talked over in, jokes made at my expense that no one thought twice about. The party wasn't the beginning, it was the last straw. I watched him from the peephole as he stood there for a minute longer, then finally turned and walked off. No voicemail, no apology, just silence. And then came the real surprise. Madison texted me. I almost didn't recognize the number, but the message was short and polite. Hi, Tyler. I know things have been tense. Would you be open to meeting? Just the two of us? I sat with that for a while. I didn't know her anything, but something about the tone made me curious. It didn't feel fake, it felt tired. We met at a quiet tea shop near my place. She was already seated when I arrived, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the socialite persona she usually wore at family events. I appreciate you coming, she said, genuinely. I sat down, keeping my guard up. What did you want to talk about? She sighed, looking down at her cup. I'm not here to ask you for money or pressure you about the trust. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I blinked. That was unexpected. She looked up, eyes soft. I didn't handle the party well. I should have made sure you had a seat, a proper one. Not just because Ethan asked me to invite you, but because you deserved it. I didn't say anything, I just listened. I thought you didn't care, she admitted, that you're the kind of person who didn't like big events. Ethan always said you were fine being left alone, but seeing you walk out like that, I realized, maybe we've all misunderstood you. I tilted my head. So, you didn't want me there? She looked ashamed. At first? No, but not because of you, because I didn't know you and Ethan. Well, he talks about you like you're this distant, unpredictable wild card. He made it seem like you'd either not show up or cause drama. I know now that was unfair, she said softly. I exhaled slowly. I didn't cause drama. I just left. I know, she said, and that hurt worse than if you had. That caught me off guard. She continued. You walking out quietly made people start asking questions. Why didn't you stay? Why wasn't there a seat? Why wasn't there a photo of you with Ethan? My parents noticed, even some of our friends. It was a bad look. I folded my arms. So now I'm a PR problem? She shook her head. No, you're a reality check. We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us processing. Then she said something I didn't expect. I want to make things right, not to fix the trust, not to fix Ethan, just to fix this. I was quiet, still cautious, still processing. You shouldn't be treated like a second-class relative, she added, especially when you've been holding more strings than any of us realized. I didn't agree to anything that day, but I thanked her for the honesty, and I left with one thought ringing in my head. Maybe I wasn't the one who needed fixing after all. The next day, Ethan called again. This time, I answered. Hey, he said, voice tired, not angry, not smug, just tired. Hey, there was a long pause. Then he added, Madison said she talked to you. She did. I'm not great at this, he muttered. I know I've messed up a lot. I didn't respond. I've been thinking a lot, he went on, about the way I've treated you, the way we all have. I always assumed you were fine on your own, that you didn't want to be included, so I didn't push, didn't invite, didn't think twice. That's convenient, I said. Easier to believe someone doesn't want to be included than to admit you've left them out. He was quiet. I could hear him exhale on the other end. You're right, he said quietly. Another pause, then I'm not asking you to approve the funds. Not anymore, I just want to talk properly, maybe grab lunch. Just you and me, no pressure. I didn't answer right away, because for the first time, he wasn't coming to demand or defend. He was just showing up. And maybe that was a start, but I wasn't going to let my guard down completely. Not yet. Because this was the same brother who left me standing at the edge of a celebration like I was invisible, the same brother who only realized I mattered when the money stopped. And now, the real question was, did he care about me? Or just what I could give him? The next move was mine, and I had one in mind. I didn't say yes to lunch right away. I told Ethan I'd think about it. And I meant it because here's the thing, words are easy, a few sorries, a few we messed ups. And suddenly everyone thinks the slate is clean, but I wasn't looking for clean, I was looking for real. And real takes time, real takes action. So I waited. A few days passed, then a week, no follow-up calls. No desperate voicemails. It was oddly peaceful. I thought maybe Ethan had given up, accepted my silence as a no. Then, one morning, I got a letter, not an email, not a text. A physical letter, handwritten, 3 pages. It was from Ethan. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and read the whole thing twice. It wasn't perfect. Parts of it felt like he was still trying to justify himself, still trying to rationalize the years of silence, of exclusion. But buried in all that, there was something genuine. He told me about the pressure he'd felt taking over Dad's role in the family business, how Mom leaned on him and leaned into the idea that he was the good son, the reliable one, how he'd resented me for having the freedom to walk away from all of it, while he stayed behind and did what was expected. He wrote, I told myself he didn't care because that was easier than admitting I did. I looked at you and saw someone brave enough to live on their own terms. And instead of learning from you, I judged you. I made you the outsider because I didn't know how to be anything but the insider. That part stuck with me. He ended the letter by saying, if you never want to speak to me again, I get it. But if there's a small part of you that wants to rebuild something, even if it's slow and awkward, I'm here. I stared at those last 2 words. I'm here. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. So, yeah, I agreed to lunch. We met at a small diner we used to go to as kids. He picked it on purpose. I could tell he was already there when I arrived, sipping black coffee, looking nervous. It was a weird full-circle moment, sitting across from him in that old vinyl booth, the smell of pancakes and bacon in the air like no time had passed, except everything had. We talked. Not about the trust, not about the party, not even about the letter, not right away. We talked about stupid things like how weird it was that the diner still had the same jukebox, how Dad still refused to upgrade his phone, how Olivia had recently tried to go viral on TikTok with a video of her dog wearing sunglasses. We laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. Eventually, the conversation drifted into deeper water. He asked about my writing, my travel. My last relationship, which had ended a few months ago, I asked about his business, about Madison, about whether he was actually happy or just checking boxes on some invisible family to-do list. He hesitated, then admitted, I don't know, that more than anything, told me he was trying. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, we didn't hug, we didn't cry. We didn't make dramatic promises to stay in touch. We just said, let's do this again, and I meant it. But that wasn't the end. There was still the matter of the trust. See, even though Ethan had made an effort, there were still structural issues with his business proposal. The review I'd requested had uncovered some questionable spending, nothing illegal, but sloppy, unprofessional. And honestly, not the kind of thing Grandpa would have signed off on. The firm called me a few days later. What do you want to do? They asked. And I realized that I didn't want to block him. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. So I called Ethan, told him what the auditors found, told him he had 2 options. He could rework the proposal with full transparency and documentation, or the funds would be denied. I expected him to argue, to get defensive. Instead, he said, fair. Then he paused and added, will you help me fix it? That part one hadn't expected. We spent the next few weeks going through everything. Meetings, calls, spreadsheets. I showed him how the trust board evaluated proposals, how to frame things. What not to say, it was awkward at first, but slowly something started to shift. We weren't just brothers again. We were teammates. Word got around, of course. Mom found out. At first, she didn't say anything, but then one Sunday afternoon, she texted me out of the blue. Dinner tonight? No explanation, no emoji, just dinner tonight? I stared at it for a good 10 minutes, then replied, why? She answered, because I owe you an apology. I didn't go, not that night. But I didn't block her either, because like I said, real takes time. Madison and Ethan eventually sent out new wedding invitations. Same couple, same location, but a completely different approach. This time, my name was not just included, it was printed first on the list of family members in the inner envelope. There was a handwritten note from Madison tucked inside. "We'd be honored if you came. There's a seat with your name on it." Literally. And you know what? I went. The wedding was beautiful, classy, thoughtful. And when I arrived, the first person who greeted me was Aunt Susan. But this time, she looked mortified. "Tyler," she said with a tight smile. "So glad you could make it." I smiled back. "Didn't think I'd actually show, did you?" Her cheeks flushed. "Well, of course we hoped. I have a seat this time, right?" I asked, walking past her. I found my table, table 3, close to the dance floor. My name was there, engraved on a thick white card in elegant script. Next to it, a small place card that read, "Thank you for holding us accountable. Funny how things come full circle." What started as an insult, being invited out of pity, had turned into something else. I was no longer the forgotten sibling, no longer the outsider. But I didn't need to be the center of attention either. I just needed to be seen, and now I finally was. Not because I made a scene, but because I made a choice to stop apologizing for existing in the shadows of people who never offered me light, to stop letting guilt dictate my boundaries, to speak up, to walk out when I needed to, and to walk back in on my own terms when I was ready. Because sometimes the quietest exits make the loudest impact, and sometimes the seat no one saved for you becomes the one everyone remembers.